This time on Poll Hub, is America's moral compass pointing true north? Not hardly. Between the sexual assault and harassment scandals, the normalization of lying, and the return of open racism, America's moral compass appears to be spinning out of control. Well, maybe. We've been asking Americans about this for years, so we have a bit of a longer perspective than most on this. Are we more pessimistic than ever? Let's find out. Hi, everybody. This is Poll Hub. I'm Jenny Dappert, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Marigoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
We're talking about the moral compass, which I think can mean different things to different people. Is this a right way, right direction, wrong direction question? Or how do you measure moral compass?
Yeah, we do give people a choice as to whether they think the moral compass of the country is going in the right direction, wrong direction. And it has tracked similarly to the idea of how people feel the country is going in general. But we specifically ask about what we sense are issues that perhaps we haven't dealt with, at least in the recent past, as openly as we are now in terms of a public discussion. You mentioned sexual harassment, certainly the issue of fake news, or whether people in general and politicians in particular tell the truth. And certainly we've had, an experience through social media and many people personally, this sense of a disagreement and discouragement of in terms of race, and that has been very outwardly visible of late. So this is a question that we have asked over time, but I think you're right in saying that it does get to the sense of whether people are optimistic or pessimistic about this issue.
And I think underlying this is a sense of, is trust falling apart, legitimacy, confidence in our institutions? And we've asked other questions in other surveys which have gotten at just, how much people are in doubt and concerned about the trust. But I think also I'd add one more thing to the list that we were talking about, and I would say, the whole money in politics rears its ugly head every now and then. And, we used to follow the money with Watergate. Now we're following the rubles, as it were. So, I think this is still part of the corruption that people are feeling is out there, and that there's something going on daily that they're hearing about. And that bombardment is affecting people's sense of the compass.
So what are the numbers?
Yeah, let me get to the numbers for just a sec, because what we found this time around was that when we asked people about the moral compass of the country and whether that was going in the right direction, 28% said it was, and 66% said it was going in the wrong direction. And that's a pretty wide margin.
That's very pessimistic. I mean, that's fewer. That's roughly a quarter of Americans saying things are going in there. That's pretty
morally.
Blue. Yeah, morally, that's pretty blue.
And that is, I think that is something, though, that we have seen over time. I mean, this is not, people often, point to the president or what's going on in Washington at this time, and this is not new. This is something that has been going on for quite some time.
What are some of those older numbers? I mean, is it?
They're
absolutely
very similar. In fact, we've never seen it the other way around. And we've been, measuring it over the last decade.
So America's been in a state of perpetual moral decline, depending on,
it's been persistent.
Depending when you are persistent.
It's very persistent, and one of the advantages we have at Marist is, of course, we can do this over time, and we can regularly tap into not only the moral compass question, but the right direction, wrong direction question, and we can see this sense of thing.
Why? Why do? I mean, are we? We're not a pessimistic people. I mean, I don't want to wrap myself in old glory here, but I don't think most people around the world think, "Oh, America, there's a bunch of pessimists." I mean, not that.
Well, that's actually right. And it was very odd and I think there were actually decades of time when the right direction, wrong direction question, and that's the overall question, not the moral compass one, was always positive. In other words, it it was inconceivable that it would fall, the negative number, or rather the positive number would fall below 50%. It just wasn't.
And that was actually a barometer pollsters used to measure whether incumbents could get reelected or not. If they were right side up on that question, right direction, wrong direction, then they had a chance. If they fell, upside down, then they'd be
But it's been
trouble.
upside down for years,
So
and people keep getting elected.
Yeah, you have to now be able to run against those numbers in order to win.
Yeah.
So, for instance, in 2002, the proportion of Americans who said that the country was on track was 60%. Now we have the exact opposite of that. 59% of Americans saying that the country is on the wrong track. And that's been persistent for a solid decade.
Does that break down? I mean, when Obama was in the White House, did Democrats say things are going great and Republicans said it's terrible? And now Republicans say with Trump in the White House, hey, things are rosy, and
Not
Democrats
to that
say,
extreme,
oh my God, run
but
for the
yes,
hills.
that's the pattern. It flips with the partisanship. So yes.
So with increasing partisanship, which we've demonstrated, we've seen in polls, everybody's seen in polls, do these wild swings in optimism, pessimism, they seem like they're not going away, they would only get worse.
Well, but it's not, and the reason why we're seeing this kind of pessimism is the fact that even if your candidate or your party is in control, that doesn't mean you're going to see the 90-10, the 90 positive, the 10 negative. It's still going to hover around 50%.
Well, that's the paralysis in government. And I think also on this topic, we have to talk a little bit about the frustration people have been exhibiting in our politics. We've had so many change elections one after another. And part of that has to do with people feeling that there's an inequality in terms of who's recovering, who's benefiting from the economic recovery. Let me just give you a couple quick numbers. In the 50s, this has to do with...
You mean the 1950s?
1950s, yes. This has to do with the share of income the top 1% gets during a recovery. So in the 1950s, the top 1% were getting about 5% of the goodies from the recovery.
A little bit of a disproportionate.
Yeah, in the 70s, 11%.
A bigger.
During the Clinton years, 45%.
Almost half of all of it went to the top 1%.
The 2009 to 2012 numbers, 95%. So when you hear about people frustrated over they're not kind of getting it, and the economic populism roots, and that ties into the right direction, wrong direction questions, you're really being driven by some of this underlying it.
What's so interesting about that to me is that arguably the most progressive Democrat as president since, I don't know, Johnson, or, well, some people would argue he wasn't progressive, or Kennedy, but maybe since Roosevelt, was Barack Obama, at least ostensibly. And this happened on his watch. So no wonder Democrats, even though they liked him personally, still are pessimistic, because they have no reason not to be any more pessimistic than Republicans, who are not in the 1%. None of us are in the 1%. Everybody has a reason to be pessimistic if that's the driver.
Yeah,
and if you believe that pocketbook drives everything, which a lot of politicians always have, I mean, that explains it right there.
But if you also talk about the moral compass, I think some people do feel that it's an economic issue that we're really feeling and dealing with right now. But I think that there is also very much a sense that it is a moral issue, and that there is a very big difference, particularly when we look at the parties, of whether they feel that the Democrats feel that the Republicans have a moral compass, and the Republicans feel that the Democrats have a moral compass. And I think that kind of polarization is also feeding that kind of an issue as well.
Everybody gets their own moral compass, in other words, right? So if I'm following the Democratic moral compass, it may be for one thing, and I say, well, that's my moral compass, and Republicans might have a different one. And if everybody's got their own moral compass, kind of like if everybody's got their set of facts, nobody can find common ground. It seems like a common problem.
Something to strive for.
Okay, we're very delighted to have with us Ron Brownstein, who's a longtime friend and someone who we've worked with over decades. I'm not sure.
It's decades, yes.
Yes, we lose count after that.
You don't have to out everybody.
Yeah.
But I should point out that most of you probably are well aware that Ron is seen regularly on CNN, and he's also with the Atlantic Media's editorial director, and you work with the National Journal, and you're probably a Met fan, or have you switched now that you switched coasts?
Yeah, I'm a Met fan of youth, yes. I grew up a Met fan.
Okay, and then also had worked, I think we got to know
I was at
you.
the Bud Harrelson-Pete Rose fight in 1973.
Really?
Yes,
Wow, so you do go back.
I do go back.
and I think we got to know you when you were with the LA Times
Yes.
originally. Publisher of 6 books, 2 Pulitzer nominations, but the most important award that Ron got was the Excellence in Media Award from the National Council of Public Policy, because Barbara and I both are members of that
Yes.
esteemed
on the
body.
board.
The fix was in on that
That-
one.
yes,
Yes. Full disclosure on that we were doing that, but we're very thrilled to have. And we should point out that every time we do a national poll, the first call every time to Marist is Ron's, or I should say email, and it goes to Stephanie Calvano, our data geek, and it's for crosstabs, which are now so common to
Yeah.
politics.
Yes.
The type of things, but you, and maybe we should start with that. You were on top of certain things. I mean, you are, I guess last time we saw you was the Super Bowl in New Hampshire.
Wow.
But then
2 years ago already, huh?
That would be 2016.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you returned to Marist. I know you've been
Which
here
means
before.
it's only 2 years until we have to all go back.
But you
Yes.
are the pollster's Mr. Crosstab.
Yes.
Right? So tell us about that. What do you look at, and you really
What were you-
discovered
yeah,
all
what
this
were
stuff.
you looking for?
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
crosstabs it's been so predictive, kind of where we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I first of all, thank you for having me, and it is great to be here with people I have not only learned a lot from, but had a lot of fun with over the years, and many years now, watching the evolution of American politics. I think, my career has been, I grew up in New York, I lived in D.C., went to California, went back to D.C. for about 20 years, and now back in California again. And I really think that it was my time in California in the late 80s and early 90s, in the era of Pete Wilson and Prop 187, which was the proposition to deny any public services to undocumented immigrants, that really kind of impressed upon me how demographic change could reverberate through politics. I mean, because if you think about the 90s, California really went through an extended struggle over a series of issues, including banning affirmative action, banning bilingual education, 3 strikes legislation, Prop 187, all of which were rooted in anxieties about the transition to becoming a majority-minority state, as we called it then. And I think that's really what got me thinking about the roots of how demographic and economic and cultural change inform the political alignments. And, as someone who started covering politics, my first presidential campaign was 1984, right? And, I've covered 9 now. And it really overlaps with a period in which the basic structure that I was brought up, learned about, the idea of the New Deal alignment, in which Democrats were the party of people who work with their hands and Republicans were the party of people who wore a tie to work, was becoming anachronistic, right? And certainly 84, my first campaign, was the apogee then, it's now gone, we've kind of returned to that height, of what was called the Reagan Democrats, which were literally tens of millions of people who grew up in a household with a picture of Franklin Roosevelt and probably Walter Reuther on the mantle, who were voting Republican. And so I became more and more, and I certainly covered very intensively in the 80s, first Gary Hart and the Atari Democrats, the neoliberals, and then Bill Clinton and the New Democrats, who turn out to be 2 sides of the coin, actually, in that the Hart,
DLC, which recaptured the party, really.
Right. The Hart side was aimed more at the kind of white collar, envisioned more of a white collar coalition, and the DLC was aimed more at winning back the blue collar coalition, which never happened. So a long way to say, and we can talk about that in a minute, but all of these experiences kind of led me to think that many of the ways that we were looking, the things we were looking at in polls and the ways in which we were describing the coalitions didn't accord with the reality I was seeing as I was reporting around the country. And I became more and more interested in how cultural change, demographic change, and economic change was infusing the political competition.
So you, in looking at crosstabs, you were asking, can we see the breakdown of college-educated and non-college-educated whites This is something that now everybody thinks about because of what's happened. But you were asking about this quite some time ago.
Yes.
It's so interesting that started with Pete Wilson. I lived in California at that time. And you think of Pete Wilson as being the beginning of the end of the Republican Party in California. And all of this other stuff. And yet that's the genesis of you asking about college and non-college education.
That and Clinton. I think that both Wilson and Clinton in different ways kind of inspired me to that. And, it didn't take long to move. I mean, as Lee will tell you, I will ask for the four-way. It's not
gender gets.
It's not a porno movie.
Yeah.
Okay, just clear. But I would ask for.
Right now, you have to make those distinctions.
You got to be careful. Got to be careful.
Make those distinctions. But essentially, that it's that if you look at voting behavior among whites. It became increasingly clear over time, and something I think is very, very relevant right now is that you had to look at whites by both gender and education. And if you really want to be thorough, you would add marital status. That is the 8-way, but you can't really do that in most polls. You can do that in the exit poll. Essentially, what became clear over time. And, I spent a lot of time with a lot of different pollsters kind of pushing them to report on this, was that non-college were more Republican than college. Men were more Republican than women. And again, if you want to go to the third dimension, married is more Republican than single. So, in fact, if you look at exit polls where you have enough people to actually do this, it arrays exactly the way you think, which are that non-college married white men are the most Republican, single college white women are the most Democratic, and everybody else arrays along the middle. And most of the kind of the cross-pressured groups are actually pretty close to 50-50.
You're talking more like a pollster than a journalist.
Yeah.
So how did that happen?
Yeah, because I felt like, as I said, a lot of what qualified as political reporting didn't accord with reality. And it was very early on for me. Like I said, the first presidential campaign I covered was 1984.
Did you bump into a pollster at that point?
No. But what struck me, what I didn't like about politics reporting, political reporting, and I not to say that I didn't. I mean, I was in the end of the era when Mastodon still bestrode the earth. I mean,
there were 3 networks.
There was Walter Mears, and there was David Broder, and there was Johnny Apple, and there was
print,
and there was Germond and Witkover. I mean, there were great, brilliant, evocative, real people who they could bring this to life. I mean, you could feel the roar of the grease paint and the smell of the crowd, as the saying goes. I mean, but what I didn't like about political reporting was the sense that it felt like we were saying that every election was kind of on a brand new piece of paper, and that everything was starting anew and everything was unique. And in fact, that just became unsatisfactory to me very quickly, certainly by the late 80s.
Well, sure. I'm thinking of the guys.
There's more solidity and continuity, and that there are underlying trends that the parties are playing off of. Now, they may try to divert them, channel them in a new way, as a Bill Clinton did, but it's not as though you're starting on a blank piece of paper, that there are allegiances, and as I said, the allegiances didn't accord with the mental image of the parties. And I still think this is true. I still think both parties in many respects, and one thing you have to give Trump credit for, both parties in many respects have been governing, as I like to say, by looking in the rearview mirror, by a memory of what their coalition used to be. I mean, the Democrats are now the party of the parts of America that are succeeding. That's what they are. They are the party of urbanized, diverse, white-collar, post-industrial, low-carbon, globalized America. That's where they get their votes. More than half of Hillary Clinton's votes, I believe, came from the 100 largest counties in America, roughly half of all of her votes. And yet, they're still operating in this kind of like they are the party of steelworkers in Akron. They voted for Trump, okay? And Republicans are struggling to adapt to this in ways that we can talk. But anyway, to answer your question, I felt like the main thing amid all of these great reporters who knew every county chair and every...
And there wasn't a lot of trust about polling at that time.
There wasn't a lot of trust about polling. I felt like what I was really interested was kind of understanding the structure, the underlying structure, and how the underlying structure of politics fit into the underlying structure of the society and the economy.
And that gives you a lens then to try to understand and unravel what just went on in 2016, perhaps the elections 2017, the recent ones, where you can now have sort of like, as you say, you have these different categories, but then you can see how the vote slides one way or the other, and then analyze where did Trump make inroads, what could have happened. Could Hillary have done better in certain groups? And that gives you now that kind of
So,
lens.
I think the fairest critique of me over my career, and one that I kind of, I give a lot of credence to, is that I sometimes impose more order than me. I mean, I see order. I mean, I see order.
Well, you have a framework for analyzing.
I have a framework, and I may impose more order than exists, but I think basically the framework is right. And the framework is that we have essentially evolved to a point where and the phrase that I use since 2012 is that we have a coalition of transformation and a coalition of restoration. That essentially you have a Democratic coalition that is composed primarily of voters who are comfortable with demographic and cultural change both. They are okay with a more diverse America. They're okay with transgender bathrooms. And they are also largely okay with the evolution of the economy.
And globalization.
And then you have a Republican coalition, a coalition of restoration that revolves around older, blue-collar, non-urban, evangelical whites that is uneasy about certainly the demographic and the cultural change, but many of them are also, as Trump demonstrated, uneasy about the economic change. He basically promised he was going to stop all of this. He was going to make all of this go away. And thus
bring us back to a better time.
And and that's why I wrote in 2016 that the key word in his lexicon was again, because that if you are a 35-year-old Hispanic MBA or a 40-year-old white-collar white woman in the workforce, there may be a lot of things about America today that you don't like, but there's no again you are trying to get back to, right? There's no moment in America's history.
There is no halcyon bygone day that
you're trying to get back to. So the again was very realistic, so very revealing. So what Trump was able, and in this world, essentially the swing voters are white collar whites. You have millennials, young people who are culturally drawn to the Democratic Party, even though they're not necessarily big government people. You have minority voters that are drawn to the Democratic Party. They are more open to government activism, but also they believe the Republican Party doesn't want them here. And then you have, essentially a Republican Party that's consistently now winning over 60% of the non-college whites, and then Trump pushed it up further. To me, the swing vote in American politics now is more the white-collar whites. And I feel like that is being underlined or underscored even more powerfully. I was telling a story before we started. It was interesting. I did not think Trump could win for a very specific reason. I did not think Trump could win because I did not think he could get past the low 40s among college whites. And the reason I did not, and the point at which I reached that conclusion was after the whole Judge Curiel fight in June, because at that point you were seeing in polls by ABC, Washington Post, among others, consistently 60% of whites saying they thought he was biased against women and minorities. College whites, 60% of college whites saying he was biased against women and minorities. I thought Trump would do almost exactly what he did among non-college whites, which was match Reagan in '84. He got 2/3 of them. I thought he would get about a third of millennials. I thought he would get about 20% of minorities, pretty much what he got. I didn't think he could get above the low 40s among college whites because I thought he couldn't run that much higher. If 60% of college whites said they thought he was racially biased, I thought that was pretty close to the ceiling, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 points higher. Ultimately, he got 8 points higher among college whites, at least according to the exit poll. And, the problems with the exit poll and all
That's
that.
okay. We don't have to go there.
Exactly. But during the course of the year, there were 2 people who I interacted with the most who thought that he could win. And they were both black Democrats, Van Jones and Cornell Belcher. And the reason they had the reason why they thought he could win was focused in on this very specific observation of mine, that I thought his ceiling among college whites was certainly under 45. And they said, not that more college whites are racist, but the fact that they viewed him as a racist would not be as disqualifying for as many people as I thought. And
that turned out to be true.
That turned out to be true. And
so look ahead. What crosstabs do you think that people ought to be looking at now for 2020? And I'm not talking about the presidential race. I'm really talking about like the future of the political system with two parties that are both at some level of being destroyed, I think. What are you looking at? What parts of the polling are you looking at? What parts of the electorate are you looking at that you think will be the movers in the next series of elections?
So, first, a couple answers to that. First, we are all Rovians now. In 2004, Karl Rove and Matt Dowd, working for W. Bush, made the heretical decision that we don't really believe there are that many persuadable voters, and we're going to shift our money from persuasion to mobilization.
Right.
David Plouffe was a Rovian running the Obama campaigns.
Yep.
Their idea was to turn out the people who believed in them. Jim Messina once told me they thought it would take $15 million to increase their share of the white vote in Ohio by 1 point. Okay, so that you can take the $50 million and put it into Cleveland, you're better off trying to turn out more African-American voters who are going to vote for you. So the first thing is, without doubt, the biggest single thing at this point is who votes. And in particular, for 2018, the biggest question, I think, is can Democrats avoid the usual fall-off that they face among their core groups of minorities and millennials? The second biggest question, I think, are the college whites. I mean, I think if you look at Virginia, there was a very striking pattern, which is that whether you want to compare it to Hillary Clinton in 2016 in Virginia or Terry McAuliffe in 2013 in Virginia, there was a big surge toward the Democrats among white-collar whites, especially women, but also men. Ralph Northam ran 6 points better among college white men and 8 points better among college white women than Clinton did just a year earlier. And turnout was very high among both of those groups.
That's interesting.
So you get to the 5 counties around D.C., the 5 big ones that people look at: Fairfax, Alexandria, Arlington, Loudoun, and Prince William. Northam won by twice as many votes as McAuliffe did. I mean, twice as big an actual margin. On the other hand, there was very little movement among blue-collar whites, right? So even among blue-collar white women, where Trump's approval rating has fallen a little, Gillespie got 2/3 of their votes.
So
it's easy.
Blue was getting bluer and red was getting redder.
So it's easy to imagine a scenario in 2018 where you see Republicans endangered in white-collar suburbs like Northern Virginia, suburbs of Philly, the Jersey seats, maybe some of the New York metro seats, certainly the Orange County seats out where I am. And that gets them right to the brink, if they can do that. Texas 7, Culberson, that gets them right to the brink of the House. But to get over, they may have to make some inroads somewhere in more blue-collar seats that are held by Republicans. And so far, there's no evidence that they're doing that. And, on the other hand, and again, if 2018, first time ever, more millennials will be eligible to vote than baby boomers. Did you know that? First time ever, more millennials will be eligible to vote. More millennials won't vote than baby boomers.
I might point out that the eligibility statement you made is not anything I'm thrilled by. Just as a personal point of privilege.
But by 2020, it's going to be something like a 6-point gap, and the first post-millennials will enter the electorate in 2020.
What are they called? Do we have a name for them yet?
They're next.
Digital
Z.
screeners? I heard a name screeners because they've grown up with only screens.
They're Gen Z.
Some people said the Homeland generation because of 9/11, but that's faded.
Or the big Claire Danes
stick.
fans. I just couldn't figure out. Probably too old for that.
I think the first thing is who votes. And then the second thing is that college whites are the swing vote. I mean,
isn't that crazy? Did you ever think you'd be at a time in American politics where college-educated whites were the swing vote?
No Democrat has ever won them in the history of polling in a presidential election. Trump only won them by 3, but he did win them. I thought he was going to lose them. I thought he was going to lose them like 49-44.
But wasn't that also Hillary Clinton's strategy to try and...
It was. She really focused on the college. All her advertising in the swing states were aimed at values, not interests, right? I mean, she basically, all of her ads were mothers and fathers looking at the TV saying, is this the kind of president who reflects your values? And, there were blue-collar white women. The biggest single reason Trump is president, in my mind, is how many blue-collar white women voted for him, which is something that gender studies professors are going to be poring over, going to make careers out of. But in the Midwest especially, there was no there was no appeal to their economic interests. It was more, this guy's a cretin and a lout, and do you really want your kids seeing him as president?
And it never moved beyond that.
And never moved beyond that, which is interesting because one of the key people in Priorities USA said to me a year before the election, so like November of 2015, that the most important thing to do was to disqualify Trump as a genuine populist. And they never tried. And I think it's too, even though it'd be interesting to see the health care bill and the tax bill have certainly given them a lot of ammunition.
I was just going to ask you about that. I mean, people are somewhat amazed, not shocked by the fact that a tax bill, for example, which clearly does not target the Trump
62%
constituencies.
to the top 1%.
Okay, so there you go. And yet that doesn't shake loose.
So here's
the short term anyway, what seems to be the Trump base.
As we all know, the Republican coalition, since the Reagan era, has basically aimed its cultural agenda at the cultural anxieties and racial resentments of kind of blue-collar white America, and its economic agenda primarily at the interests of the top, on the grounds that will trickle down and create more growth for everyone, give it the most favorable analysis. So essentially, you have an economic agenda aimed at the top, a cultural agenda that's more kind of bottom up, and that has been it is, as I wrote this week, it has been a delicate but durable balance. I mean, they have made this work for a long time after What's the Matter with Kansas came out, and people were kind of like, how can this sustain? It is under more pressure now from both ends. It's under more pressure on the cultural side because Trump is more overtly appealing to racial resentments than earlier generations of Republican politicians, again, with the Muslim tweeting today and ungrateful fool and Judge Curiel and, Charlottesville.
The list is long.
The list is long. So that puts more pressure on the white collar side because it's harder for them to say in polite company, I stand with this guy. And you see that in the exodus of all of those business people from his councils, advisory council, which is the canary in the coal mine, I think, for Democrats about where to go. The other side, though, there's more pressure because if you go back to the Reagan tax cut or the Bush tax cut, both of which I covered. I mean, I cannot believe I covered the Reagan tax cut. But, back then,
durability.
Back then the criticism was, well, the Reagan tax cut or the Bush tax cut gave more to the top than they give to the middle, right? They are going much further this time in that they are taking away, from many people in the middle, whether it's on the healthcare bill or on the tax side, to give to people at the top. So, by one analysis, 60% of families around the median would pay higher taxes in 2027 under the Senate bill. Meanwhile, in the top 1%, 83% of the people in the top 1% would get a tax cut averaging $43,000. So they're putting more pressure. So in some ways, as the agenda gets more plutocratic on the economic side, the cultural agenda has to get more corrosive, intense
to
offset it,
yeah.
And that puts more pressure on. So which side does it break on? So far, I would say that they have more to fear from well-off people who think that Trump violates their values than they do from blue-collar people who says that he's betraying their interests.
One of the things that comes out in polls over and over and over again is Donald Trump's support among his base, however you want to define his base. He sits at just under 40%, and as he's famously said, he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and choose somebody and his voters would still vote for him. And that is true. There's just no denying the fact that that's the case. Is this really, though, a cult of personality? If you look at that polling, you look at the durability of that, is he more of a cult of personality, and the Republicans or Democrats may have to refigure everything once he's off the scene? In other words, his cult of personality doesn't necessarily accrue benefit to Democrats. It doesn't necessarily hurt the Republicans. They may come out of it better. What do you think of that?
No, I think he is accelerating long-term changes in a way that will outlast him. I do think that. So first of all, part of the problem with talking about whether his base is moving away from him is how do you define his base? If his approval rating is around 40% or below, and he got 45, 46% of the vote, he's lost somebody, right? And clearly, I think in particular, his approval among college whites now is somewhere in the 36 to 38, 39 range. He got 48% of them. You have to remember that on election day, 20% of the people who voted for Trump said he did not have the character and temperament to succeed as president. But they were willing to give him a chance. Either they wanted to change, they wanted to blow things up.
Or they hated Hillary.
Now, I think many of those voters have had their doubts about his personal behavior confirmed. ABC Post, last poll, 67% now say he doesn't have the temperament to succeed as president. And I think that's real. So I think to say that there's been no erosion in the base, I think is not true, because I think he's lost particularly white-collar voters who took a flyer on him and have now recoiled more on personal than policy grounds. That's the first thing. Second thing is that, as I said, we have been living through a long-term realignment of the parties around what I like to call the class inversion, which is essentially Democratic Party increasingly the party of white-collar America, Republican Party increasingly the party of blue-collar America, Democrats the party of urban America, Republicans the party of non-urban America, Democrats the party of kind of cosmopolitan, Republican kind of culturally, religiously traditional. Okay, all of that predates Trump. Trump accelerates all of it.
Interesting.
Stomps on it, like, like he revels in the whirlwind, right? He clearly is someone who believes that chaos benefits him as a strategy, that he believes chaos benefits him. So I think that you have the possibility that Trump is defining the Republican Party as a kind of culturally, what's the word? Revanchist party, really, as a party that is culturally trying to hold back the future in a way that is going to make it very hard for Democrats to claw their way back in the rural and blue collar districts that John Spratt and Ike Skelton and John Murtha used to represent. I don't see that.
Is this a permanent realignment?
I think so. And then largely, yes, I do. And then conversely, I think that Trump is defining the Republican Party as a racially intolerant party in a way that is enormously threatening to Republicans among younger generations.
Yeah.
I mean, 70% under 30. And I think in both New Jersey and Virginia. Today, University of Chicago, I don't know if Macy's can talk about gimbals, but
yes,
they're
absolutely.
That's what we do here, actually. We like to talk about other polls.
They're polling on millennials. 3/4 said that they are concerned or scared about Trump being president. Approval rating at 22%. So I think that it is entirely possible that we come out of this. Like, for example, in 2018, I don't know if Democrats are going to win the House back or not. It'll be close either way. But one thing I do know, I feel very confident the separation between basically the urban, tolerant, diverse, white-collar America that is blue and getting bluer, and then everything else that's getting redder. Like, it's possible that, the Democrats will win a whole bunch of the seats that Clinton carried, most of which are white-collar seats around the big metro areas, and that Republicans could even win 1 or 2 or 3 more of the Trump Democratic seats in the Iron Range in Minnesota. No. And we end up with this further, what's the opposite? Debrading. And the braid is being pulled apart of the country. It really is. And we are separating in a way that reminds me of the 1850s, and I have no idea where it ends.
Yeah, well, certainly it will end tonight with a class of Marist students who are going to be enlightened by your observations. So we're very happy to have you part of our Pollcast, Poll Hub, and also look forward to your returning to meeting with Marist students.
Excited to be here.
And plus we get dinner at the same time, so that's really good. And I think from the...
Is that the bribe?
Yeah, that's
my only request is the exit poll on the reactions. We're going
That's
to
right.
have to get a lot of the detail crossed out.
We have Joe Lenski ready to provide those.
Exactly.
But certainly this discussion so far, and I think we'll see later this evening why you are the pollster's journalist, and so on target with so much of what we think journalists needs to.
Joe Lenski will tell you that I'm the only person who has made him provide the difference in the vote between Hispanic and Protestant Catholics.
On that note,
Hispanic Protestants and Catholics, yes.
On that note, Ron Brownstein, delighted to have you with us.
Thank you.
And we'll catch up with you downstairs.
And that'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Institute for Public Opinion here at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. And Mary Griffith is our fine executive producer.
And we'd like people to send questions to pollhub@marist.edu. We'd love to hear from you, talk about some of the topics we should talk about, and also some of the things we might poll about. You might suggest things along those lines as well.
And check out Poll Hub on social media at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, everywhere. And please don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to us.
See you next time.